it's a mirror of who we are. And so if we understand what we're designing, we can design incredible things. What sits between a human and a machine? And how you define what that is. Transparency, responsibility, consciousness, understanding, and in each of those concepts, truth, we talked about that, because I see it as a magnification of the originator or the source. And do we understand value versus risk, which is ultimately the appetite? If we don't ask the right questions, and very often I find people don't know how to ask the right questions.
Because AI is not a technology problem as such, it's a human problem. Jo Michalska, hope I got that right.
Yeah.
So yeah. I think this is a really important conversation for us to explore the human side of AI, something which has been alluded to on many occasions on the podcast, but just to provide some context, can you give us a little bit about your background?
Yes, it's a good question, and where do I start? I think if I were to say this in one sentence, I would say I'm a risk person.
Okay.
And at heart, what that means, there's so many different dimensions of what that means to me, but I see risk as a baseline of who we are. And even though my professional background is a couple of decades in financial services, my way of looking at things through the prism of banking has always been funded within how do we as humans understand the impact of what we do and who we are on our everyday. And that's as simple as that, really, because it doesn't really matter what we do. And in this context, what I have done in the last couple of decades, it's, do we understand who do we want to be to drive the impact that we can? And it sounds very philosophical, but my choice of where I want to invest my energy in the last, probably that's changed actually over the last several years, has always been from a perspective of, are we aware of what we're not aware? Do we know what we don't know? How open are we to be curious about learning what we're just not aware of? And that underlying theme is transformation. And how do we help businesses, risk organizations, CEOs, boards, decision makers, let's say that. How do we help them make better decisions? Do we know what they need to know ultimately? So whether we're talking about commercial directions, what product we're developing, what do we want to achieve strategically, what is it that technology wants to achieve? Do we have technological capabilities? Everything locks within transformation, strategic insights, and obviously risk. So that's really my background, but everything is wrapped in this passion and this need to understand the human psychology. How do we behave as humans? How is our background, our education, our way of thinking shaped the way we behave in the workplace, or obviously in life, but in this context in the workplace. So I suppose that answering that question is quite multi-layered, but
Well, I think it's a very good description as well, because we're at a time in humanity's existence where things could be changing forever. And we could consider it good, we could consider it bad, but in many ways that's all contextual and perspective driven. And obviously what we're talking about is the advent of AI. Now, the concept of artificial intelligence and what we've seen over the last couple of years and where we've ended up to today, that could be broken down when we look at ethics, we look at risk, we look at what we've been sold, what public narrative is. I mean, it's opening a can of worms, but I think we've got to. I think we've got to explore this. And my personal belief, and of many around us, and I know many of the podcast guests as well, is AI is not a technology problem as such. It's a human problem. And if we're to understand how to proceed forward and how to educate for CEOs, how to educate for people on the ground, how to educate across business and the workplace, what impact will have, what decisions will lead to positive and negative impacts, and for whom. Is it ROI? Is it the bottom line? Is it people's livelihoods? There are so many different things. If we frame this conversation from a human perspective, let's delve in from there. So, how would you define the most important factors that should be considered in business and life in general of how to think about AI from a human perspective?
It's a fascinating question, and where I think, for me, my personal belief is that the number one aspect of it is human awareness, and that has multiple dimensions. But if I were to break it down into three parts, I would say self-awareness, social awareness, and more of an organizational awareness. And it's what actually is awareness, and for me it's just the way we think, the way we act, and the way we feel. And the reason why I consider awareness so fundamental is, we can create so many incredible technological advancements. We can, capability, AI, technology, emerging technologies, capabilities are extraordinary. And I think sometimes we get so excited as whether it's leadership or CEO, it doesn't really matter who you are, obviously, depending on what your priorities are. The excitement could be quite deep. And we forget that all of these things are only as effective and only as impactful as people who are actually instrumental in designing it. So I like to call it conscious design. And the more conscious, the more aware we are as humans who participate or lead the process of design, the more impactful, sustainable, and value creating those technologies will become. So it's not about capabilities. Technology, like you said, AI is not a technology problem. Fundamentally, it will mirror the bias, it will mirror the inefficiencies and some of the potential biases that we as humans may or may not be aware of. So that's why it's fundamental that we're actually allowing ourselves to be curious and open-minded, because we know what we know, but very often we don't know what we don't know. And only if we are surrounding ourselves with the right people, we have the right teams, we have the right support from, if I'm not suggesting that we know everything, because we obviously don't, but the team of people who understand human psychology, the cognitive psychology of it, the ethics around it, that will allow us to build much more safely and responsibly. And we have a architecture around trust and accountability. Only then we can really have the responsibly sustainable outcome, in my mind.
So if we were to break into a case study, a use case of how you would look at ethics and how you look at risk and how you'd look at responsibility in some of the big models, right? So information is sourced. So we look at the different phases. So we've had the internet. We were discussing that before. Lots of information was the internet. So from an AI perspective, some of these models took a lot of information. So from an ethics standpoint, a trust and truth basis, a responsible basis, upside, a lot of information available to be shortened into communicable paragraphs. The risk is copyright theft, the cognitive bias of absorbing massive amounts of what we know to be relatively incendiary, heavily biased opinion and conflating that with fact. The disconnect between the ability to say what information was sourced where, so giving up what truth is. So that takes us to one point. The second phase, which is obviously some of these systems are widely out there. What is the ethics and responsibility and trust basis of putting something out there untested, unsecure, which hallucinates with prompt vector attacks, all the other things which are, from a cybersecurity perspective, even an ethical side of, well, how does this work if children use it? I mean, suddenly there's a load of landmines you're looking at there. And then thinking, well, how about from a third stage? Is it good that these big models can charge money to large companies to recommend or increase the frequency of recommending their brands in apparently agnostic results in general conversation? I mean, if you put humans instead of AI in the basis, you would say, well, in any job you'd be fired. That's probably relatively criminal, fraudulent, manipulative. We seem to have a different standard because, don't worry, it's AI. But it's who stood to gain and whose AI, who made what decisions. So the creator's kind of conundrum there, the creator's responsibility there. I mean, I don't think we should be walking into a world where we are simply the byproduct or the byproduct of manipulation and influence is what we are presented as fact and reality, or subjectively, probabilistically accurate. I mean, there are so many holes in that.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I very often hear that, AI does this or AI does that. And the reality is the narrative is flipped, because it sounds very often as if AI is leading something or doing something or opens the gates for something. And the reality is a tool, that and that existed for quite a long time. It's just accelerated pace of adoption, and very often ununderstood adoption. This is not misunderstood ultimately, right? So who is supposed to be responsible? Who is accountable?
Yeah.
And I think that is a critical question that a lot of executives are starting to ask much more thoroughly these days, because ultimately their responsibility is often it's fiduciary, right? They have responsibility towards their shareholders, of course they do. There is so strategically they are there to make sure that, we're making money. There's also regulatory responsibility. Great. There's certain things we have to do and we're responsible for that. But at the end of the day, the social impact of making decisions by some of these big corporations is often undervalued, because they, do we really understand what we're doing by making certain decisions irresponsibly? And at the end of the day, who is accountable within those models being released? So first of all, do we have the right model of accountability is the question, and I know the answer is no. Very often if you ask people within those organizations, do you know what's your accountability within that AI, let's call it a machine ecosystem? Because there are different accountability levels, naturally, and they all carry ethical responsibility, ethical element around it. But do people know what it means in practice. I'm not talking about, theoretical, philosophical ethics, in intelligence. We're talking about, as a person who is responsible within this ecosystem, what is my role? What is my accountability? What am I what is my voice and my responsibility, really? What kind of an impact is that creating? Am I aware of that? And most of the situations where that question is asked, people are, either they can give you some sort of an answer which is not really, which is indicative of, no, I don't really know, or they don't know.
But it's not really unsurprising in the context which I'm hearing more, and what the work that we've been working on. We've passionately believed, and we have some joint friends who've been working on trust and truth based, but with a point and purpose, right? So human led. First of all, what is the problem? What is the nature of the problem, and what are we trying to solve it? And why are we trying to solve it? It just so happens that there are benefits to be gained within structures which are very clearly understood, with forms of artificial intelligence, because all AI is not the same. And again, if you understand what the point and purpose is, what you're trying to achieve, and from human perspective, then you can understand, well, how do you create structure? How do you create guidance, rules, ethics, and value of importance at every single step of the way? When you know what you're trying to achieve, you know how you're trying to achieve it. When you use the understanding of, oh, AI will fix it. What are you doing? Well, we're getting AI. Why? Oh, because it's the future. Then it's
The roads.
It's crazy, because without a point and purpose, I mean, if you jump in a car, say, yeah, I'm going to drive somewhere. Where are you going? Yeah, to a place. Well, how long are you going to be in the car? How much fuel are you going to use? And where are you going? Well, no, it's the future, cars. You would just think this person needs help. But
Often,
that's the approach which is put forward. And then the other side of that, we'll have different backgrounds, we'll have different experiences, we have different areas of expertise, and different life experiences, whether it's local, cultural. We are individuals, and we all have a different life experience. So if a handful of people of a very particular socioeconomic background, in a particular socio-culture, so to speak, not from an international perspective, but from, say, Silicon Valley culture, do they realize the implications and the impacts of what to them seems relatively innocent? Now, from a developer standpoint, possibly not, because, as you said, the things that you don't know, you don't know. And if that's all the perspective of life they had, and everyone around them is of a similar mindset, then how does it affect a company in the City of London? How does it affect a kid being educated in Africa, or someone in Eastern Europe, or Scandinavia, or Canada? We could go on for ages. We could find the different life experiences and say, why would the world adopt one particular group of people's view of what all of our future should be, knowing that it is not being considered? Which is why these conversations are so important. How can we have the conversation and say, it's okay to appreciate not everyone knows, but we don't need to accept everything. We do need to be inquisitive. We do need to question.
I agree. I think the questioning part of it is so important. And again, we go back to the awareness and building trust, because trust at the end of the day is critical to get to as a state of being, really. Because trust, I have experienced quite a lot of blind trust, and again, trust itself as it is awareness has multiple levels, because you could think about compliance trust, which is pretty important, but also pretty superficial. And then you're talking more of a relational trust, and in this case, that will require much more co-creation time. And in this context that you're talking about, it is so important that people who are users, consumers, whether it's whether they use the AI as an output, as a tool to receive some sort of an output, actually question and understand how this output is created and how is the data curated. And that's just, I'm not even talking about enterprise type of adoption of AI technology. I'm talking more about just a regular person who has access to whether it's ChatGPT or any type of machine-based technology. If we participate in the use of it without questioning, we're ultimately becoming very complacent into whatever we are told. And the reality is, whose truth is our truth? And whoever designs this have their own agenda and priorities. And without creating this collective consciousness, almost let me call it, without sounding too abstract, what I mean by that is cognitive intelligence and an ability to inspire our own critical thinking and talking about this. I think it's so, and I've seen it many times, positive and negative experiences where people are actually really questioning. It's like, is that really right? Who, why, and how this has been curated, where's the data coming from, who has control over this data, who is accountable for making sure that the entire end-to-end life cycle is actually well controlled. And awareness, as I said, is the first point. The second point of that is creating a architecture system, whatever you want to call that, and in this case it would be organizationally, that actually is designed to be very transparent. It's very clear who's making decisions, who's responsible for the outcomes, who's accountable. Is this aligned with the value system that we believe is important to us? And that actually applies whether we're talking about individual or more of a organizational consciousness. It's really, really important that we start questioning and asking the question and asking some, what I wanted to say, fundamental questions, but sometimes sometimes common sense is not that common.
It does make me think, how aware are people of the choices? So when I think of the popular domain and the usual understanding of the only choice, it's cloud-based AI. So you go to a service and you leverage someone else's model, and it's cloud-based. And you can distill them, or you can take the models and retrain as your own, but it's still someone else's model. It's pre-influenced, it's pre-everything. Or there is another choice, and that other choice, so I heard, I'm not going to mention the name, hopefully, because he's a guest very soon, but one of the world's most influential people said something at dinner the other night. He said the future of AI, in his view, given this particular individual's importance in the world we live in today, is that it needs to be a personal space where an individual, even an organization, can present and make accessible to the world their perspective, their data. They need to own their data, be in control of their data, and have a relationship where that authenticity, both from a legal and jurisdictional basis, there's a relationship with that personal domain. At the moment, where the perceived common choice is not, we're being absorbed into someone else's universe, and there is simply that influence. So that other choice, I mean, for everything negative, there is something positive. For every this is the way, there is another way. And it's the risk, it's the pros and the cons. And from an organization, I believe, and this is from all the discussions I've had, the future of AI in enterprise will be organizations leveraging the best capability of cloud, the internet, but that the models and the AI in its multi-capability form and the data that is used within the models and transactionally remains within the organization. And from a personal perspective, the control will be from the individual. My AI will get to know me. Your AI will get to know you. But it's not you're a distributed node on someone else's service. And that's the conversation which is not in the public domain. And I do feel that having these conversations can always sound like very negative and end of the worldy, but there is incredible positivity. But the up and down side of if it's purely all that cloud influence, and it's nothing wrong with the cloud, that's simply the delivery mechanism. But if you're only part of someone else's ecosystem that you don't control, it's not your data, and you're just a node of it, then you're not going to have the control. You're not going to have a valued input, and you're simply a contributing factor to generalization. Personalization, or the personal view, even within a network like an organization, to see those different perspectives as a value. As a woman, your perspective on a particular topic may be that different to a man. It could be your culture, your origins are different to mine. Maybe they're quite similar, but that's where the diversity of views and even the experience, you have a hell of a lot more experience than I do in other areas. And I would be fascinated and say, well, how do you think about it? And show me ways that I would never have thought of. That's what makes a company work.
Yes, I think that is an incredible opportunity, what you've discussed. And I think, and I have obviously quite a lot of I'm quite passionate personally about the whole concept of data sovereignty, and even understanding and defining what that means, because that will be individually driven by every person. I think your question around the choice, I think the awareness of what our choices are, and stripping away any type of work environment, but as humans, the conditioning through which our life has been shaped, there's very little room for sovereignty, because we live in so much definition that is driven by other people. And very often it's not encouraged for us to explore maybe what our own authenticity actually means. So we end up waking up one day and thinking, "Ooh, interesting. Feels like I've been living somebody else's life." I'm speaking from personal experience, happened to me. And so that ongoing questioning and redefining of what my personal sovereignty actually means as a concept, and questioning how that evolves through our life, and that how it's reflected in our daily life, because that of course then will be reflected in our all areas of our life, including impact on relationships that we form. There is an element of it that will then be almost, I would say fighting against, but conflicted against the predefined, how it's available elsewhere. So there is a level of compatibility that will be created between our own authentic, personal, individualized choices to form the concept of autonomy, sovereignty, owning our own data, and understanding we have a choice. We don't have to participate in predefined reality fully. And there's obviously individual choices will then lead to, to what extent do I actually want to participate in that? That's a different topic. But that can only really, we can only get to that point by curiously asking ourselves this question, what choice do I have? What choice am I comfortable with? What do I actually want? How do I understand it for myself? I mean, power of that, and understanding what are these capabilities of allowing us to actually evolve as humans are unlimited. And I suppose even that understanding through our own limited, what I would say, limited in a concept of what our brain is actually physiologically able to do. It's, I mean, we live in our unconscious mind most of the time.
But that's the thing which has been subject to such influence for at least a decade now. I mean, that's probably the function and the purpose of social media. And if you really look at it to understand how humans can excel and how humans can create and enhance the human experience, enhance productivity, you could look at it of every spectrum of life. How AI can really be good is most likely leveraging scale factors on an individual or group of individuals' abilities. So it's a multiplication of the human. But if it's the capabilities maybe 1,000 times, but the human capability is 0 times 1,000 is still 0.
It's incredibly powerful point, and that's why I am so passionate about helping. It doesn't matter what areas of life we're talking about. My focus is always around, helping people understand how they could become a better version of themselves. And it sounds super cliche, but really what it means is, do I as an individual understand how I can become more conscious of my impact on myself and other people? Because only then I can be a part of this conscious design, whatever that technology is. Because like I said, it's a mirror of who we are. And so if we understand what we're designing, we can design incredible things, and it can help us, the impact of this can create that conscious design, what sits between a human and a machine, and how you define what that is. Transparency, responsibility, consciousness, understanding, and in each of those concepts, truth, we talked about that. Each of these concepts is in itself its own definition. So by speaking about it, by helping people define it, because those definitions will be driven by experiences and belief system and value system, and it will differ, but helping people understand, see it, and live it, it fundamentally will change of what impact that AI, machine technology, whatever it is that we're talking about, the technological capability can potentially have, can accelerate impact, can do a lot of things that we've never seen before. Because I see it as a magnification of the originator or the source.
And I think the key there is you mentioned before when we were talking honesty, and honesty can be very difficult. And if we're looking at honesty with the context of being influenced, so are you the product of influence, given everything around us, everything that we wear, the watches we have, everything, we're a targeted customer. So are you the customer, or is it free choice? And I think I've mentioned this before, but looking at music, from a young age, and we're before the age where everything was served by algorithm. But if all you've ever known is what you've been sold, then do you have choice, or are you a product of it? So that's where the honesty comes in. And you say, well, your belief system, how much is your belief system? And how much is what you've been influenced? I mean, this is the power of influence.
It is.
Which is, in many ways, forms of artificial intelligence before it became popular. This has been around for a little while.
This is a hard truth. Honesty is a hard truth very often. And, if I were to answer this simply, is it me or is it a sum of influences? The answer is always going to be a lot of me is a sum of my influences. And I think owning that takes some courage, because
then you can explore. If you're not cognizant of that, you can't explore. Right. And then there's a perpetuation of a line of thought which you can swear blind is yours.
That's right.
But have you questioned it?
Yes, and it's have you questioned it as one? Second question to self is, do I understand my own blind spots? Because if I now if I accept, and that's the first step, if I accept that I'm a sum of influences and actually take a conscious effort of understanding what those influences are, just with an open mind, okay, what are these things? And how many decisions in my life have I taken because I've acted from my unconscious influence? That becomes power. And when I say power, I mean that is a connection with true, authentic part of us. And only from that place we can say we're awake to our decisions.
Well, that's what gives you choice, as opposed to the illusion of choice or the feeling that you don't have choice. Mm-hmm. And I mean, that is very powerful. And any AI which is to be propagated out in the world, mm-hmm. surely should have that human basis as its foundation.
Absolutely, if that's the priority. So it depends on, what is the narrative around it? If the priority is we want to do the right thing and we want to design it so that it's used in a way that could create so much positive impact, absolutely, that is the foundation of it. But of course, sometimes, the agendas are different, and perhaps
could we be agnostic then and look at it a different way, coming from the point of truth, but saying aligned with the point and purpose. So point and purpose. So I have to say it because it's a thing. As a Newcastle fan, if they're playing, I want to see them win. But where they played Atletico Bilbao last night, if I were Atletico Bilbao fan, I would say, well, I want them to win. So what is right and what is good, without getting into anything unethical or evil, there are two completely contradictory or diametrically opposed views. And it'll make some people happy, and if it makes some people happy, it'll make some people sad, and vice versa. So if we look at the point and purpose from the perspective and the context from where you sit, with an organization, in any industry, if you're in charge of supply chain, or if you're in charge of risk, or if you're in charge of sales, then the point and purpose is probably contextually relevant to your passion and the metrics to which you're measured and what you're trying to achieve. They, given the nature of life, the universe, and then people like a bear killing a salmon and eating it. Well, it's good for the bear, but maybe not so good for the salmon. Not everything can be a good outcome for everyone, so to speak. But are you going to then proactively hurt people in your decision? Of course, that's where there has to be an ethical standpoint. But I think the point and purpose, what you are trying to achieve, if we were more agnostic about it, but still had a point and purpose, then that should surely overcome the generalized, we're going to do stuff, it's going to be great, we're going to do stuff, it can be great stuff. They're like, well,
surely.
for who?
Of course,
Like,
yeah, no, but the question around point and purpose is important, and why are we doing things is really important. So why, if we decide that we're going to develop a specific capability, depending on the context that's the most impactful for us and aligned with what we're trying to do. Personally, I believe that if it's designed appropriately and has the right level of accountability, transparency, and the right people with the mindset in implementation or end-to-end implementation, it can only do good, really, right? If you curate the data, understand the data, if you have the right controls, which, this sounds very conceptual, but is really important as it's being designed, it can get you to your outcomes, whether it's strategic, regulatory, or social, much faster, much better, and much more advanced and I suppose efficient way. It can also, and this is a big part for that I believe it's really, really important, it can help with development, human development, because what people do today very often is exhausting. They are in jobs that require them of very procedural and mundane and quite boring way of executing or operating something, a part of the process. Now, obviously, with the whole agentic AI and how we can implement more automated part of the processes, that can take that away. Now, where we really need to spend some time, and again, that is not a focal point today, is how do we increase this AI literacy? How do we transform people's jobs and actually allow them to grow their critical thinking, grow a different skill set that perhaps today, in many jobs is completely overlooked because people are drained, exhausted, and focus on way too procedural way of performing. It's a very performative. So the shift from operational performative, that's taking over by automated parts of the process, machine part of it, once designed responsibly, let's say, it can really unlock a human potential that's been asleep up until this point.
and in effect, any company, what their most valuable asset probably has been, is, and will be, irrespective of technology, is its people. Now, if you look at the perspective of, again, subjectively what good looks like, we've heard from many people that in reducing headcount can give the interpretation of increasing profits because you've reduced costs. So from a short-term perspective, agentic AI can be the coolest thing in the whole world, but I mean, all of this technology from the agentic basis is very immature at this point, and again, designed by people that are not particularly anything to do with the industry or the expertise for the people that they're allegedly replacing. And as you said, a complete misappropriation in many ways of people's capabilities by doing things because that's the business as usual sort of basis. So if people were to look at how could we enhance the abilities, capabilities, and scale of their humans and redefine more as experienced operators or people to unlock their creativity, say, well, here's the problem. Because ultimately, every single job in every single company, you're there for a reason to solve a problem. And it can be very wide-ranging. We've got legal issues. Okay, we're in the legal department. We need to make the figures stack up because we need to understand what's going on so we can do procurement, we can employ people, and right, that's the financial department. We need to sell stuff. We don't sell stuff, we don't make money, and then no one gets paid. Right, we need sales. So there is a problem. If we took that contextually for every department, said, well, how are we doing it now? Who are the people doing it? How do we understand what good looks like? And then is there a solution individually, but also organizationally? How does communication come into it? I mean, if you had an employee and said, they're great, but they never speak to anyone, or maybe not speaking to anyone, not communicating is an issue. Maybe they're just unreliable, they don't turn up on time. Well, there's a lot of metrics, and we should really judge or set the standards of AI in the same way. So, well, this one sticks by the FCA regulations. Right, what are the consequences if they don't? Probably a bit naughty, go to prison, your reputation, you could lose your license, massive negative effect. Is there any risk that this technology could breach regulations? Well, absolutely. At this point, a lot of the AI technology, the LLM based, it functionally doesn't work in a way which is compliant in any meaningful way, shape, or form by its very design in existence. So why would anyone think, well, that would be a good choice, but we'll treat it by different standards? All of these rules and regulations, although some things may be over-regulated, but the majority, and everything at some point, has been put in place as a risk-based reaction to an adverse circumstance. So it's almost a preventative measure after being burned.
True. And there's so many aspects to so many aspects of risk to all of this. And I'd say, you know, as I was listening to you talking, I had this thought, you know, consistent thought that, you know, we cannot avoid progressive evolution of technology. That will happen. This cannot be stopped. Now, the jobs that exist today absolutely had been put in place for a reason, and you know, problem solving is always a baseline. And I had something this morning by somebody that I really like, who is a futurist, and he said, the rules of the game has changed. If you apply the same rules that you've learned in the previous game, you will not be able to participate. And I thought, you know, what a great statement, because obviously he was talking about AI specific, you know, AI's future. But I thought actually that applies pretty much to everything we do,
Of course,
right? Because we evolve all the time. So if you're thinking about all of these jobs that had been created whenever those problems were valid at the time, those problems will become less and less relevant as part of what we do. Let's just, you know, as a part of a job, let's say, these problems will be less relevant because the technology will help us solve them faster.
But aren't we creating more problems? So surely we should be observing the problems that are being created, and in solving some older problems, we're probably creating new problems.
That's true.
And everything is changing
I agree.
all the time.
And the reason why new problems are being created, because I think the way, personally, for what I've observed, is how this technology is being implemented is not adequate. It's not safe. It's not, you know, it's not done through a lens of oversight that's actually appropriate, and therefore more problems appear. So step number one is being aware of what we're doing, why we're doing it, and how are we doing it. Second, do we have the right structure in place to make sure that happens? Third, and actually this is not in a sequence of any type of priority, but, you know, do we understand how the role of a person in this process changes? Because, and you know, and the more I think about it, the more I think, you know, there's a lot of things that we can design the machines to do, but there's things that are human qualities that cannot be taken over by the machines. And do people really understand what they are? I don't think so. There's a lot. I think there's a lot of delegation of human qualities. Oh, AI will solve my problem, but really without forethought of what that actually means. So the intelligence can become really effective, and by intelligence I mean technological capabilities, only if our intelligence improves, and that's on many different levels.
And in many ways, we're being told, no, it's too complicated. And people are being made to feel, I'm not an AI expert, so I don't feel I have a right to talk about it. Which is insane. in reality, because the majority of people that are actually full-on AI experts tend to be researchers in universities, which have no experience of the rest of the world making decisions that have massive consequence to people. One who I found fascinating, who's traversed both, lovely man, wrote a fantastic book, Paul Donger from NatWest Banking Group. And he's been raising these issues and has written a book in it, but sees it from both sides, and is, I think, seeing these points put forward. The shocking thing that I've observed across the world, across many different sectors, is the lack of almost right that people feel they're allowed to even communicate about it. And speaking with Paul and obviously yourself and many others, well, as a human problem, because it's humans putting technology in place. There's humans are responsible for all of these things. That's where the accountability sits. And to be told, on one hand, I don't know, you don't have the rights or the intellectual bandwidth or the experience to have a view, your opinion, but you will take responsibility for it, and you will put this in. It's kind of being hoodwinked in a way. And I think this conversation must happen, and people do have the right to have a view about what they understand and know about, because they're probably far more qualified.
And it's a very good point, because I think there is this we talk about demystifying of what AI actually means, but in just practical terms, if we just understand AI as technology, and we're thinking about whatever your part within that process is, you are the expert. You are the leader of that thought.
Yeah.
And you own that. And whichever parts of that process you execute, or you oversee that execution, you understand the risks of that going not the way we're intending it to go. And in effect, by just increasing literacy around what AI actually means and giving people the right words, education, and that is on every level organizationally, not just leadership. There's a different level of literacy that is required at different levels, but actually giving people the right education. By education, I just mean language. We will empower people to actually say, right, I own this, I'm accountable, and I'm accountable for what I know. I'm not expected to opine on some sort of engineering specifics that I'm nothing to do, I don't understand. That's where I think a lot of the problems stem from.
And it's entirely plausible and fair to not be a technology expert, but to say, what is my appetite? Our good friend uses the word appetite a lot, and I think it's very, very useful. Do you have the appetite for this risk, or do you not have the appetite for the risk? And it doesn't matter how you come to that conclusion. Well, we're using open weighted llama models, or we're using this, or we're using something different. But whatever the risks are, the risks are. Can you trust the data? With this type of element, we can't. Do you know where it comes from? No, we can't trace where it comes from. Well, that's out of appetite.
And it's what I call the trust architecture, right? So we talked about the awareness, and they're asking the right question early on in the conversation. The second is that do we have the right structure in place? And by people often call it governance, but I try to avoid that word because it inspires bureaucracy. There's some sort of a connotation around, oh, this is a bureaucratic structure, but actually it's a well-intended system that inspires transparency, where everybody knows what they need to know and what happens if they don't. Everybody knows in the decision-making process what is the risk, who owns that risk, and how we can improve in order to get us to the outcomes we want, whether it's a strategic priorities or whatever else we're doing as a business. And do we understand value versus risk? which is ultimately the appetite. If we don't ask the right questions, and very often I find people don't know how to ask the right questions, and whether that's leadership or whether that's board level, they don't know what questions need to be asked, or they should be asking, or receiving answers to be able to make the right decisions.
So often that comes down to from what I've seen with people, going back to the influence point. People are influenced to say, you've got to use this, you've got to use AI, you'll die otherwise. But they've been influenced to be disempowered about having the right to talk about it. So their confidence has been squashed in one way and fear-driven. It's all influence. I mean, saying before that the LLM versus the LGM, obviously from our perspective, we created the LGM, but we did so working with John Everett, on the basis that trust and truth is a non-negotiable empirical basis upon which to create a foundation for using artificial intelligence for a point of purpose. To be told that all AI is the same, or it's just AI, I mean, hence the term, in the generic sense, well, it doesn't take too much to actually be empowered to say, well, yeah, this is how we define the metrics of what we find acceptable within an organization, what we're looking to achieve, and that everyone can talk about it. But it's
a very important point, and I think what I would say, and that's critical also, how do we create the right culture within the organization? Because ultimately, in order to empower the people to be able to ask, speak, and be curious and actually challenge, you need to have the right culture, not of fear. And that is often a very new concept.
But it also should come from the top.
Yes.
And that's the people that have been probably most influenced, because why? They report to the shareholders. And if the markets are saying, you've got to use it, otherwise you're in trouble, then of course they're going to, as the spokesperson of the company, the CEOs, are they going to say to their teams, we need to use this? What is it? Figure it out. We need to use it because it's going to affect the share price. Someone I know well said to me, for his bank, it doesn't matter what decisions you make, so long as you make the decisions which are going to increase the share price each quarter, which doesn't make sense for the daily decision making. But if we're cognizant, it goes back to the honesty point. Well, if that's the honesty, we go, well, how do we deal with this? Yes, there are pressures here, but how can we still ensure we can communicate, discuss, make decisions, and understand what we're all trying to achieve, even if it is being cognizant of the pressures others are under? It goes back to your point of empathy. These are human issues.
Of course. And I agree. And, we cannot, and we've spoken about this earlier, we live within a world that is defined by a specific sets of rules and principles and systems, and they do have certain limitations, and there is things that we are part of, no matter how individualistic we believe we are, and no matter how aware we are of us being influenced by other things, right? In this context, we cannot get away from the fact that organizations existed to make money, and shareholders' prices and all of that stuff, and people who are at the top. And I completely agree. They need to shape the organization direction, and only they have a power to say, right, of course, like I said, the algorithmic progress it's not going to stop, and we all need to use it because that's how we make progress. I get that. There's a context around that that's important. But I also understand, and this is where I think needs to become a real point of focus for people who are running these organizations. Yes, we're going to do that, but we are actually accountable to do it right. We are going to make sure that shareholders focus of shareholders' priorities are within our frame, we will be accountable to our regulators, to our customers for what we're doing. But we're not just going to be looking at the short, medium term. We're actually looking at societal impact of what we're doing. So it's not just about making any decisions just so we implement technology. It's about doing it sustainably. It's about sustainable, responsible, ethical value creation. So there is a multi-layer of an impact to customer, to personal kind of an impact, organizational impact, societal impact. That is that's where the true power of this lies. If we really see it as a much more holistic impact rather than just, we're going to make money, we're told to do this way, so we will. It's a very fragmented and, I'd say, for me, irresponsible way of looking at things, because the impact that this creates, a blind implementation or a lack of awareness in implementation, things that can actually create an unknown impact, is very dangerous.
Well, I think what you've just described there is really valuable, and again, why we did this podcast. People that don't understand how to think about that, how to communicate it, how to structure these thoughts, sharing these aspects, again, is what's interesting about the world. We all have these individual unique lives, and unless we talk about it, maybe we're not going to stumble across it and think, do you know, I never thought of that. And it is important. I mean, I would hope the majority have thought about it, but to get more confidence and to prioritize, because what's the risk? Going back to the beginning, what is the risk if you don't? Will your company be around in 5 years? What damage will it have?
And do you know?
Do you know?
Do you know the answer to these questions?
And if you don't, you should probably prioritize it very quickly. So
I agree.
There's a huge relationship between all of this. Well, in conversation, I think we've covered a huge amount.
We do.
And is there any last final points you would like to, if you could give 3 little points as takeaways, what would they be?
I would say the first, awareness is the only way to safety. So how do we do it safely? Owning who we are and what we're responsible for as we are living and creating impact for others is so, so important. And I really believe that all of us have something to contribute, because we're unique individuals, and accepting that, yes, we are influenced by many different things. That is the reality, but we're also responsible for our own decisions in our own awareness. And that is an ongoing journey that we're going through every day. And if we accept that, we can create collectively an incredible amount of impact to the world.
I think those are extremely important and extremely valuable insights. Jo, it has been a pleasure.
Thank you, Graham.
Thank you.